What's good, folks? Another day in the Derek Chauvin trial, which I've been watching quite regularly. So, again, if you're new here, we've been covering that pretty regularly on Periscope, Facebook, and YouTube. And for those of you who are new, do hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. It's very helpful. That gets you access to live, and hit the notification bell too, so you get notifications when I go live. Also, like facebook.com/human events media. That's a way to get access to these when they happen. But I assume if you're here at the beginning, things are generally pretty good. I think the bottom line conclusion today is that it was a very good day for the defense. What people might say about the expert witness being crossed into the ground is not true. I think that basically what the defense expert did is exactly what you would want a defense expert to do in any medical trial: introduce reasonable doubt and defend his opinion. And that's what I think he did very effectively today. Dr. Fowler, who I believe was the chief medical examiner in the state of Maryland or something along those lines, gave an informed opinion that the cause of death was cardiac arrest, with contributing factors, including the drug use of George Floyd, his serious hypertension. I mean, the guy had something like a 90% blocked artery in his heart, as well as potentially even carbon monoxide poisoning. And I thought what was done well today by the expert Fowler, which was not done yesterday, is that his opinion was armored. It was very defensible. There wasn't a point in the opinion where I was sitting there thinking to myself, man, that's going to be a hard argument to defend, a hard argument for him to, be able to hold on to. And I didn't see that here. This was very, he was humble about the extent of knowledge he had, and humble about, how much you could attribute cause of death to. But I thought in general, it was quite persuasive for him to say, look, this is, there's a lot of different things that are happening here that would contribute to a cardiac arrest. And it's also that's also the simplest explanation for what you saw on the video, in terms of him being able to talk and able to breathe and all those things happening until instantly it's like he wasn't able to do that. That would fit the timeline of a cardiac arrest just as well. So that's a big problem for the prosecution, because this isn't a civil trial. And it's not a 50-50, it's not like a college debate round or something where you're just making a decision about who wins and who loses, who has the best argument. That's not what this is. The prosecution has the burden to prove causation beyond a reasonable doubt. And in the aftermath of this testimony, I think as an objective matter, that would be very challenging to do for an average juror. To be honest, I don't know how George Floyd died. It might have been the positional asphyxia, but this doctor seems very convinced that it was not the positional asphyxia and that it was much more likely to be cardiac arrest. How do I not have a reasonable doubt that Derek Chauvin's actions were the cause of George Floyd's death? How do you know? There's jurors who think they can just make a decision that this doctor isn't credible and that Dr. Tobin is. But this doctor is a very good, experienced forensic pathologist. Why would you assume he's lying? There's no evidence to suggest he's lying. The cross-examination didn't really undermine very much. The cross-examination was able to poke tiny little holes, things on the weight that would have been on Chauvin, that would have been on Floyd, that, the analysis didn't take into account some of the weight of his gear. But I think in general, that's not going to be, it's it's one thing to poke little holes in testimony. It's another thing to to reveal that it was bankrupt. And very little of the discussion that was happening across examination centered on anything relating to his underlying diagnosis of cardiac arrest. And I think basically, the defense lawyers are in the same position that, the prosecution lawyers are in the same position with vis-a-vis Fowler as Nelson, the defense lawyer, was in vis-a-vis Dr. Tobin, which is they're not in a position, they're not equipped to actually argue medicine with the experts, right? So they kind of, what you heard, I think there's going to be a rebuttal witness coming I think on Friday. And I think the point of that rebuttal witness will be the prosecutors need somebody to get up and say that Fowler is completely full of it. Because if they don't have that, how do you not have a reasonable doubt? So I thought, the prosecution didn't do a bad job in cross. I thought they poked, they didn't let Fowler get out of hand. They poked some small holes, but here's the problem. A good job in cross is not enough here. You needed what the prosecution needed, given an opinion like Fowler's, what they needed to do to Fowler, what they did to Broad yesterday, which is to basically make Fowler recant on the stand, right? They needed Fowler to be just revealed to be either completely ridiculous or, that make him recant, not concede to certain small points, but like completely have his opinion undermined. And here, I don't think they did that. I think that, the reason you have like that Fowler was in general so effective is that he built he has a very defensible opinion that made a lot of sense. So I think, that was pretty effective, right? Is it a Tobin rebuttal? I mean, possibly. I don't know that they could recall Tobin. That's an interesting question. Possibly. I don't know if that's allowed. Like, you would think that whatever they would want to get out of Tobin, they would get out on direct. So it's kind of weird to be able to bring him back on, in terms of, but I guess that's possible. I don't know the rules of Minnesota procedure, and I've never seen that done. So I guess it's possible, but I don't know. Jay Marie says commentators are divided as to whether Derek will testify or not. I don't know. Again, I could see it going both ways. As I've said before, I think this is one of those cases where the risks of defendant testifying are lower than normal because the facts aren't really in dispute. Really, the question here is about intent and what Chauvin was thinking. And so Chauvin himself might be in the best position to sort of humanize himself and help the jury understand what was going through his mind. So I think that is not unreasonable for Chauvin to seek to participate. But then on the other hand, the general rule is that you don't let defendants testify unless you absolutely have to, because you don't want to make them look like clowns on cross-examination. So I think, those two things conflict in my mind. I don't know the right answer about whether or not Chauvin will end up testifying here. Somebody says all we seek is justice. I understand that, and I think everybody really wants justice here. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want justice done, but part of justice is due process, right? Like, there's not one of the things I see that frustrates me a lot, especially in the discussion of this case, is the failure to acknowledge that the way our legal system works and what we consider just is that we would let 10 guilty men go free before we'd convict an innocent person. I think that's a very important part of our legal system, and that means reasonable doubt matters, right? And here, the nature of this death, the George Floyd's death, is one where there are multiple plausible explanations for why he died, and that's just based on the fact that his heart was 90% blocked, that he was on fentanyl and methamphetamine at the time, that he was, you see the manifestations of his behavior being very different for long periods of time. So that's one part of it. And then also, like, the questions about exactly what was negligent about what Derek Chauvin did, and did that negligence actually connect to what killed Mr. Floyd? I think the weakest part, for example, of Dr. Tobin's testimony was when he was trying to connect the knee on the neck to the positional asphyxia, because it sounded like the positional asphyxia, like, you look at the diagrams of that's all about the weight being pushed on the chest to the ground and the inability to expand the lungs. It doesn't have anything to do with a knee on your back. The prosecutions had, they let the first witness testify about a blood choke, which would be totally implausible in the circumstance, which would need, a double thing. So I don't think, I think this is one of those cases where if you're actually looking for, what justice is, you want to see the legal process play out, and you want to say, like, did they actually prove all elements of the case beyond a reasonable doubt? So somebody says Derek will walk. I still think that's the most likely outcome here. I see reasonable doubt. And I think even a normal juror, there may be jurors who are really motivated to convict George Floyd. There may be jurors who are really scared of the consequences of what will happen if he's acquitted. But then there is going to be a juror that just tries to follow the judge's instructions and takes the evidence as it comes. And I'm sorry, I don't think the prosecution's proved cause of death beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't. I think they probably have right now a little bit of the better of the argument. If this were a civil trial, they'd probably be the favorites to win. But this is a criminal trial. This isn't a civil trial. You can't just be like, well, it's more likely than not that it was positional asphyxia. You need to eliminate cardiac arrest as a possibility here. They haven't done that. Franz has said that you're excited to see me on Tim Pool. That's right. In case you were wondering, I will be joining Tim Pool on Friday night. I think will start at I think he starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, if I recall correctly. 8 p.m. Eastern, Friday night. So normally when you'd be watching Tucker, but instead turn on Tim Pool and Tim Cass will be able to watch me talk about a lot of things. And we'll go from there. I'm going to keep going through your comments, but it is in some ways, I mean, it was a long period of testimony today. There was a lot of cross-examination and a long direct examination. I think this is the only witness of the day, but I think it's going to turn out to be the most pivotal witness of the trial, because it's going to be the one that, introduced reasonable doubt on direct and then really survived cross-examination with his opinion basically intact. Very little of what the prosecution examined him for, did anything to undermine his basic thesis, which was this is a cardiac arrest. Here's why. And I think that's a huge problem for the prosecution, right? You need to rule that out, and you don't do it. So let's see, what did the judge mean by saying he had to give the state preference in the counter witness business? I'm not sure. I don't want to be too far ahead of my skis, but I assume that relates to the fact that the state has the burden to prove reasonable doubt. And so perhaps they get a little more leeway in terms of offering rebuttal witness since their burden is heavier. I'm not sure, but that's what I suspect the answer is here. Ricky asks if Chauvin is accused of manslaughter or full-on murder. Both. This is an indictment with multiple counts. It has a second-degree manslaughter count, which is the one that, given the facts, is really, honestly, in my opinion, the only appropriate one. I think the second-degree murder and the third-degree murder are both overcharges, just period. But I think there's both manslaughter and murder charges in the indictment. Somebody says that ME is on the take, won't entertain any other explanation, hates cops. I don't know. I mean, if you're talking about Tobin is being the one that hates cops, I don't know that. I think I just assume he's a lib. The Irish tend to be libs. And so I just assume he's a lib. And that, there's because there was Jonathan Rich, the cardiologist, was a super lib with a whole bunch of anti-Trump stuff and just happened to volunteer to offer his expertise. I'm a lot more skeptical, honestly, of volunteers in the cases like these, like people who are trying to get on television and really want to put somebody in jail. Very, very skeptical of those people. And in fact, less skeptical of the people who are just professionals and taking money. What, if anything, will happen to the settlement awarded to the Floyd family if acquitted? Nothing. That settlement is intact. I don't think, that settlement, part of, the basic rationale of that settlement is they don't know neither side knows what way that the trial will come down. And so they're reducing their uncertainty by agreeing to the settlement. So I don't think an acquittal here will have any effect on the $27 million that Floyd got. That said, if I were a Minneapolis taxpayer, I'd be infuriated that $27 million of my dollars were going when, well before you had actually proved causation in the trial. They kind of, I think I would be really annoyed by the way they're handling that. Looks like I have a zit on the top of my nose. Random. Got to get rid of that. It's terrible. If a juror can't rule out cardiac arrest, how can they justify a manslaughter conviction? They shouldn't be able to, right? And hopefully I think in closing, they're going to hammer, I would expect Nelson to hammer on that. If you can't rule out cardiac arrest, you can't convict. You can't. It's just true. It's just true. So a lot of conservative Irish in San Francisco. That's fair. I might be wrong about the Irish. I don't know. Maybe it's not like the Irish Americans who tend to be more conservative, but like the Irish immigrants, recent Irish immigrants. I don't know. Maybe, I might be wrong about that. Who knows? Is this bigoted? I don't know if it's bigoted to make, broad-based being like the Irish are libs, but to me, it's like the same way as saying if you had a lot of recent British immigrants, you'd likely be getting libs because the British public is generally more liberal than the American public at the moment. Do criminal courts often look like this in the US, or is it just huge media and public attention that makes everyone do their best? Do their best. I don't know. The criminal trials look like this. They're usually a lot shorter. Most criminal trials are only a day or two. They don't involve this many witnesses. There's a lot less emotionality in most criminal trials. Normally, a lot of the emotional testimony from family and people like that would have been saved for sentencing once the guy's convicted and you're trying to talk about the severity of the crime. I'm surprised the judge let a lot of that in. So here we go. Cardiac arrhythmia. That's right. That's what I mean. I mean, cardiac arrhythmia. I'm not a doctor, but neither are any of the jurors, which is sort of the problem, right? Which is part of the big problem for the prosecution here is none of the jurors are doctors either. So I don't think this is going to be that great for them. Leslie Stark says today's defense is much better than yesterday. I agree. I thought yesterday was good for a number of the witnesses. Nelson was able to score some points with Shawanda Hill, I think her name was, proving that, Floyd was asleep and very difficult to rouse. He was able to score points with Chang, and the fact that he was able to show a video of George Floyd's friends being flabbergasted by his behavior. There were all points scored there. But the defense use of force witness was a total clown. I think his career as use of force witness is over. And I think in general, I think today was much better because I think that today's defense witness just held his ground and put forward a plausible opinion. And so, there might be some of the jurors who just don't care and think George Floyd's guilty or whatever, but I think a juror who's taking their job seriously would struggle to overcome reasonable doubt as to the cause of death. So one of the jurors is a nurse. That's not going to be enough to basically like reverse one of the findings here. I don't think a nurse doesn't have the sufficient like diagnostic training to think that they would supplant. I would hope to think that they would supplant like a forensic pathologist. And yeah, as Wizard Predict says, I thought Nelson's redirect was very good, right? Like he was able to, one of the things that I thought was kind of ineffective on cross was, there was a moment where there was a discussion about these studies of positional asphyxia and how the author had maybe retracted it. And, the witness is sitting there being like, hey, you're omitting this important part. And the prosecution, lawyer is like, nope, you can talk about that on redirect. Nope. And it's like, you look weak because then they're going to come back on redirect and reveal the part that you wanted to hide. There's the cross, I think in this case was like very narrow and like kind of deceptive. And I was underwhelmed by it in terms of like, it's been part of the problem throughout the trial where they've been like the prosecution's tried to ask really narrow questions and then they're getting kind of revealed for hiding the ball a little bit on cross. And it's so the similar thing here, they're asking really super narrow questions on cross and getting, proven to be having the ball hidden on redirect. Would I bet money on acquittal? Like at this point, yeah, I still would if that was a thing. Like I wouldn't put the odds maybe as high as it was before the use of force expert got blown up yesterday. I wasn't counting on that. So now they're kind of, I think really, if they're going to win this trial, if they're going to win an acquittal, they're going to win it on reasonable doubt as to causation. And that's one issue instead of two. So I think the odds of acquittal are something like 60-40, 65-35. That's what I place it at this point. Right. Somebody says, I served on jury duty in a notorious case. No faith in the process was a circus. It still might be. Who knows? That's a good question. Might well be. So this is something that was talked about. The witness today is being sued for covering up a murder in 2018. So that's a complaint, right? I actually read about that, and I was very underwhelmed by people reporting on that as though it were that serious. That complaint was filed 4 months ago. It hasn't even gotten past a motion to dismiss yet. So all that means is that some lawyer some ACLU lawyer in Maryland is making allegations. That's all that means, right? Like the fact that, people get sued every single day of the week. And unless there's no discovery that's been taken, you can make trust me, as a lawyer, I know what kind of allegations get thrown around in complaints. They can get pretty wild because at that point, you're just alleging things you think might be true, right? That you're hoping to prove in discovery. Like that, that's not, people are really, really overweighting that. It's like saying the guy, comes from South Africa, so he must be a racist. Like it's roughly as persuasive as that. Yeah, and exactly. He's a defendant on it, not a huge thing. He's not the primary party being sued. I think that's true. Yeah, and as the MS-20 user puts it, the nurse was asked if they could put their knowledge aside and not let it influence their decision, and she said yes. Exactly right. What do you think about the accidental taser shooting compared to Chauvin? I think so. My initial reaction to that was involuntary manslaughter, based on kind of my remembering what involuntary manslaughter was. But I was actually like mistaken. I think that ultimately my prediction is that indictment will get dismissed. I think, and here's the reason. So to understand, in the criminal law, there's been a modern move to really distinguish negligence from recklessness. Negligence is merely like not doing what a reasonable person would do without any intent or no conscious intent required. Recklessness is negligence plus like conscious disregard of a risk. So say like, the difference would be like, there's a fire that burns down a building that you should have stopped or you should have seen or ultimately responsible for. But one person sees the fire and one person doesn't. The person who sees the fire and then walks away anyway might be having conscious disregard, whereas the person who didn't know would just be negligent. For criminal liability in these involuntary manslaughter cases, it looks like in Minnesota you need conscious disregard of some risk. Now, if you watch that video again, I don't see conscious disregard. I don't see any evidence of conscious disregard of anything. I see pure negligence, right? She thought she was holding a taser. She was scared and frightened, and she shot, and she just realized it after it was over that she was actually holding her sidearm. That's what, to me, the evidence suggests, which means it's going to be very, very challenging to even get past a motion to dismiss in the criminal side of this involuntary manslaughter indictment. On the other hand, there's certainly negligence, right? There's no way to not call that negligence. Like, it's just straight up incompetent to pull your sidearm when you should be pulling your taser, or you're trying to pull your taser. That's something you should absolutely avoid. And my instinct is maybe this is wrong. Like, maybe this needs to be punished more aggressively, precisely because we never want police to make that mistake ever. And so in some sort of abstract sense of justice, I think, actually prison time would be fairly just in this instance, because this should just never happen. It's the kind of mistake that should be completely unacceptable, especially from police officers. Somebody says, this lawyer is clueless. Oh, Anne, I'm so sorry. Do I need to like put again, people keep doing this where they're like, this guy's saying things I disagree with. He must be an idiot. Did you graduate magna from Georgetown, or was that me? Oh, wait, that was me. Sorry. Like, have you practiced in big law firms? Oh, no, you haven't. Well, that's actually me. Sorry. Yeah, like very, very, very straightforward. Somebody says, how long can the jury deliberate? I don't know the answer to that question. That's where I'm not, I didn't do enough practice to really have a good handle on that. As Jay Marie says, bad idea for a South African to take the stand right now. That seems kind of bigoted, frankly, to like just immediately assume South Africans are racist. Like, or people of South African descent are racist. Like, that seems bigoted, frankly. Do I still practice? I'm still licensed. I don't actively practice nowadays, although I do a lot of legal analysis, and I still have to keep up with continuing legal education to keep my license. So, but no, I don't take on clients. So anyway, let's see. The guy with the nuclear codes can't say, oops, I feel terrible for all sides, but this needs justice. That's kind of the way I feel about it. Like, in the abstract, I feel like that woman should be, that there need to be criminal consequences. But again, like, you have to go by the law and the criminal law and what it is in the state of Minnesota. And in its wisdom, the Minnesota legislature has decided that criminal liability should only attach if there's conscious disregard of risk. And by that standard, I don't think they're going to be able to secure a conviction or even get past anything. So let's see. I like this. I've watched Perry Mason, Matlock, Judge Judy. Think I know more than a Georgetown lawyer. I think the jury should have been sequestered from the start. I don't know. I'm not like super familiar with jury sequestration in general. Let's see. What about the transcript from the deposition where the other case where the state was trying to say he did not say 220 pounds, the kneeling term, burking or something like that. Yeah, I was really unpersuaded by that because, you could say, like, you could hear the doctor being like on the stand being like 220 pounds and like multiple people sitting on them is kind of the same thing. Like, these things are not inconsistent, right? Like, and the sort of the insinuation that like he was lying under oath in the previous testimony or he's lying now, that was very, very sketchy. I was not impressed by that at all. So somebody says, so he died of a fentanyl overdose. That's not what the medical expert said. And I think the medical expert went with cardiac arrest. So, and the real answer is, I think we just don't know why he died. Somebody says, I think the judge has leaned to the state. I don't know, maybe slightly, but I think the judge has been pretty fair. I haven't heard a ruling from the judge where I've been like, flabbergasted by it. I think he's allowed a little bit too much cumulative testimony. That would be my thing. But, other than I think he has maybe a slight prosecution lean in this trial, but in general, no. How well do I think the defense is doing? As I've said, I think the defense in general has done a very good job in this trial. I think they're winning right now. I think there's reasonable doubt on causation. And I think an objective juror should come down and acquit and vote to acquit here. Not necessarily on the theory that they like affirmatively believe that the positional asphyxia had nothing to do with it, but rather that there's just reasonable doubt. Somebody said, what do I think? That's not relevant to today's discussion. As somebody says, a demand of 0 errors from police in a country of 300 million people is unachievable. It's a tragedy, and she should be fired, but nothing more. I mean, like, I agree that like some amount of mistakes are inevitable. I don't know though. Like, I just think some mistakes are so grave that punishment is there. I mean, and certainly at a minimum, that's negligence, right? Like, I think I've talked with people who are like gun owners. They say there's no such thing as accidental discharge unless it's truly like it's a very bizarre situation. But if you fire a gun and you didn't mean to, that's negligent. That means that's lack of reasonable care. And so at a minimum, that's a lawsuit, right? That's a wrongful death lawsuit, and she and the department will be liable to pay that man's family. And I think that's the right answer, right? Like, you can say anything you want to about the fact that guy had a warrant after his arrest, definitely resisted arrest, definitely was trying to flee, like all terrible things, all things that, contributed to the problem. But at the end of the day, like, that officer was negligent. There's no way you should ever be pulling your sidearm when you should shoot your taser. Like, that's just not reasonable care. That's not reasonable care. The process of the Floyd family settlement, I don't know that there's a process. They literally would just, I don't even know that the Floyd family even filed a lawsuit against the city of Minneapolis. I'm not sure if this was, it certainly was like, I think they were waiting to file a lawsuit until the end of the trial. So this is just a pre-complaint settlement, which really means there's no process except the two parties got together and negotiated a settlement. Ben Crump has a really good business model going. At this point, he's the lawyer every family goes to when there's a wrongful shooting, and those cases are lucrative. Think of how little litigating he had to do to get $27 million, and what he's going to get a chunk of that. Like, it's just really, he's got a very good business right now. And the amount of work that he and his team have to put in is trivial relative to the settlements that they're generating with no litigation. It's impressive. Let's see. That family's going to get $27 million. They might well get a ton too. Somebody says, I don't know if anybody feels the same, but I feel for Chauvin. I think, these are all tragedies, right? Like, I feel for that woman. Like, clearly she wasn't trying to kill the man, and she's been a police officer for a long time, and now she's facing a manslaughter charge. Like, that sucks. But, sometimes, like, there has to be accountability. So, as Gino Callan says, my son does training on firearms and use under stress. No way she should have mistaken her taser for a service weapon. Right. Like, that's what I mean. It's negligence. Like, it's just straight up negligence. There's no way around that. Let's see. But as the Sad Falcon says, she's not the first officer to mistake her taser for a firearm. In minuscule numbers, it does happen. It's exactly right. And whether or not that's going to be criminal is really going to depend on the laws of the state. There are some states that don't recognize this recklessness negligence distinction in the same way, where one requires conscious disregard of a risk. And so as a result, in those states, I think there's like more, you have much more criminal exposure in a situation like this. But even so, it's like one of those mistakes that just shouldn't be made. Do I think that Chauvin will be acquitted? Yes, as I've said. I think that, odds are tilting that way. I wouldn't be as confident as I was because of how weak the defense use of force witness was, but I still think there's more likely to be acquitted. Thoughts on the news that the GF was teacher dean to right? Just one of those random coincidences based on people living in the same area. Again, very tragic. But man, like, we need people to learn. But these are both deaths that would have been avoided had the subjects complied with police instructions. And it wasn't, in a way, it wouldn't have been that hard to comply under the circumstances, right? Like, all George Floyd needs to do is not demand to be put on the ground, right? Right. He just needs to chill in the back of that car and likely doesn't even have a heart attack. Or maybe he does still. I don't know. But certainly this Dante Wright guy, like, all he needed to do was just not resist arrest. And people forget, like, why is he in this situation? Like, I saw Cori Bush had a tweet. Let me see if I can find that tweet. I thought it was just terrible. Absolutely a terrible tweet that she had. Here it is. So this is it. Charging the officer is not justice. It's just one step in a flawed process towards accountability. Justice is a country where Dante is not pulled over, where he is not killed, where Black people can live free of fear from police violence, where we can thrive. Like, why did he have a warrant out for his arrest? Because of an armed robbery of a woman of color. Like your world is a world in which, like, this, like, your world of justice is a world of profound injustice where people can't be, like, can't have their harms done to them redressed. All right. Anyway, my voice is going a little bit, and it's almost half an hour, which is about as long as I like going on a Periscope, because otherwise we just keep talking and talking and talking. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back tomorrow to do, talk through whatever happens tomorrow. And then again, if you are wondering, I'll be on Tim Pool on Friday night, heading out to Maryland to the compound. Actually, I'm in Maryland. So heading out to the compound, and we will see him and say hi. So later, folks. Peace.